Hello. Good morning, afternoon, and evening. No matter what time it is where you are. I just hope it's a wonderful day. I don't have time to jibber-jabber today. I've got to get to the VO because I have a late afternoon appointment, so let's get right to it. Today's video takes us to the town of Libby in Lincoln County, Montana, with a great view of the Cabinet Mountains. Hi, I'm Den from CRYPTID'S Den. This is the story of Tom. Now, Tom will be the first to tell you. He's not great at this kind of thing. Typing, for him, feels more like carving something in stone than just hitting a keyboard. He used to run a manufacturing business, and later bought a small freight company. When I asked his son to help him write this email, Tom got all flustered and said, "Don't embarrass our family with this nonsense. Nobody wants to hear about it. Lol." Has no idea. I've been listening to channels like this for a long time, and I know people would love to hear his story about a Sasquatch named Luella. He just doesn't want me talking about it because, honestly, he's not a big fan of Luella. But I'm going to tell you all about it anyway. It took a lot of courage for him to send me this email. What finally pushed him to do it was remembering what I always say. Emails don't have to be perfect. So, here it is. Tom's story. The one we called Luella. She wasn't human. But she changed everything we knew about being one. It began with the smell. Sour, metallic, and wrong in a way that made your stomach twist before your mind could name it. That spring morning in '76, just before the sun broke clean over the Cabinet Mountains, Tom Carver stepped out into the crisp Montana air and found something sprawled on the back lawn of his farm. A thing not of this world, yet bleeding like any creature desperate to live. It wasn't roadkill. It wasn't bear. It was something else entirely. 7 feet tall, tangled in black matted hair and barely breathing. Its face melted on one side like wax near a fire. One eye ruined. A crude metal trap mangled its leg beyond recognition. Gangrene had set in, and it was dying right there between the barn and the apple tree Bradley had planted the summer before. Tom had every reason to put a bullet in its skull. He even raised the rifle, but then it opened its good eye, and something passed between them. Not fear, not anger, something closer to please. Not in words, not out loud, but deep enough that Tom felt it in the marrow of his bones. That's the day they started calling her Luella. Not it. Not monster. Luella. What happened in the weeks, the years that followed? Well, most folks wouldn't believe, but this isn't about convincing anyone. It's about remembering. Because some stories don't want the spotlight. They just want to be held. And this one, it held us back. From fear. From hate. Maybe even from ourselves. Now, let's go back. Before the blood. Before the name. To the first time the forest whispered something was watching. And to the moment when the Carvers stepped into a mystery that would change their lives. Forever. Carvers arrived in Libby, Montana in the spring of 1974, chasing something that couldn't be measured in miles or money. Something heavy. They left behind the concrete hush of Brooklyn, the heat rising off sidewalks, and the rhythm of a city that never let you forget you were small. What they came to was a different kind of silence. One that didn't echo, didn't hum. It watched. Tom had served as a combat medic in Vietnam, a man of practiced quiet and survival instincts hardwired by war. Laura, his wife, had grown up in this very place before moving east. But the land had changed, or maybe she had. Their son Bradley was 9 then, full of questions and restlessness, more connected to cartoons than cattle. The one who brought them west was Doris Whitaker. Dory to most. Laura's mother, a woman too proud to beg but tired enough to need help. Her farm was struggling. The land was 75 acres of rough hills, dense pines, a stubborn creek, and the looming shadow of the Cabinet Mountains to the east. Isolated, rugged. A place where the wind sounded like it carried voices if you listened long enough. At first, the move felt hopeful. There was work to be done. Fencing, milking, feeding livestock, patching a roof that seemed to inhale snow every time the wind changed direction. Dory still rode her horse, Speckles, into the woods most mornings like it was nothing. Her grit was granite thick. She had chickens, a couple of pigs, a mean old dairy cow named Daisy, and a fire in her belly that time hadn't yet put out. But then the noises started. At night, after the lamps were turned down, and the stove's heat began to fade, sounds drifted in from the forest. Strange, high-pitched chittering, like children laughing at something they shouldn't be. It came from deep in the trees, bouncing off the ridgelines and sliding under windows like smoke. Bradley thought it was owls. Laura blamed foxes. Dory, though, she stiffened when she heard it. Not afraid, exactly, but unsure. "That's not anything I've heard since I was a girl," she muttered once, pouring another glass of bourbon and staring out past the barn into the pitch-black timber. The sound came 3 nights in a row, then stopped, until the day Dory came back from her ride. Shaken. It was late afternoon. The sky had that coppery haze it sometimes takes on before a storm, and the light was long and brittle through the trees. Speckles trotted in from the edge of the woods alone, nostrils flared, eyes wide. Seconds later, Dory emerged, on foot, mud on her jeans, and something else in her eyes. A shadow, maybe, or disbelief that hadn't settled yet. Tom was repairing the chicken wire near the coop. "You okay?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stared at him, then at the house, then back at the tree line. "I saw something," she said. "A bunch of somethings." They sat at the kitchen table while she told it. Her voice was low, like she was afraid the walls might hear. She'd ridden about a mile east, past the little stream with the limestone rocks. Near a bend in the creek, she'd spotted movement, at first thinking it was a group of elk or maybe drunk hikers. But it wasn't. There were at least 10 of them, hunched, covered in thick, dark hair, all clustered around something. Something bloody. "They were eating," she said, "ripping into something raw. Like wolves. But they stood like men. One of them towered above the rest. 7, maybe 9 feet tall. Muscled like a linebacker, with a gait like it never knelt to anything. Another sat apart, thinner, smaller, hunched like it was injured. The tall one kept bringing it chunks of meat, placing them beside it gently, like feeding a child. It wasn't chaos. It was ritual. Tom asked if she was sure. She nodded slowly, sipping coffee with a hand that wouldn't quite stop trembling. "If I hadn't seen it myself, I'd call it crazy. Hell, I am calling it crazy. But they were real, and they saw me." Her voice dropped. "And they didn't care. That night, no one slept much. Then the howls came back. It started just past midnight. A wave of sharp, rapid screeching, wild and high, like a chimpanzee being torn apart. It echoed, layered, overlapping, as if multiple throats were crying out at once. Laura sat up in bed, hand clutching her chest. Bradley crawled into their room, shaking. Then a roar. Low, deep, commanding. It rolled through the timber like a drumbeat made of thunder. And then nothing. A silence so total it felt like something had pressed down on the world with both hands. They didn't go back to the creek the next day like they'd planned. They stayed close to the house, checking locks twice, eyes drawn to the forest line with every gust of wind. 2 mornings later, the thing appeared on their lawn. The moment Tom stepped out the back door, he knew something was off. The birds weren't singing. The goats were restless. Daisy was mooing low and long, pacing near the gate. Then he saw it, sprawled at the edge of the clearing where the grass turned to brush. At first he thought it was a bear. Then he thought it was a man in a costume. Then neither made sense. It was breathing, barely. Its leg was twisted unnaturally, a rusty trap still clamped above the ankle. Flesh blackened and rotting. Flies circled, and the stench hit him like a punch. But it was the face that broke him. The left side slumped, warped like plastic left near fire. One eye was gone, but the other was open, and it was looking at him. He raised the rifle, but the eye didn't blink, and something in him buckled. Not in fear, In recognition, in surrender. She didn't speak. But somehow, Tom heard her anyway. Please. And that's when the story truly began. Not with a discovery, but with a decision. Tom Carver didn't believe in monsters. Not in the way movies told it. He believed in bad men, in the things people did when no one was watching. He believed in war, in blood, in how silence could be louder than a scream. But monsters? That was a thing for stories. Until Dory came out of the woods that day, her eyes bloodshot, her shirt damp with sweat, and her voice small in a way Tom had never heard before. She didn't speak for a full minute, just stood on the back porch, hands clenching and unclenching like she'd left a part of herself out there in the timber. Speckles, her mare, had run back alone, nostrils flaring, lather foaming at her flanks. That wasn't like her. That horse didn't spook easy. Neither did Dory. And yet, they were people. She finally said, breath ragged. But not. Tom was by her side in 2 steps. Start from the beginning, she took a sip of water and looked him dead in the eye. There were 10 of them, maybe more. They were down by the bend in Rock Creek. I saw them before they saw me. Big, hair all over. Not bears, bigger than that. Not apes either. Too upright. They moved like people. Fast, sure. But it wasn't just that. They were gathered around something. Eating. It was like watching a pack of wolves, but with hands. Tom felt his gut tighten. Laura stepped closer, eyebrows drawn. One of them stood out. Dory continued. Taller, broader, moved like it commanded the rest without saying a word. And then there was another, smaller, sitting away from the group. Looked hurt. The tall one. He was feeding it, like a father feeds a child. He'd rip the meat and walk it over, then stand there waiting. Like it was sacred or something. Bradley, who'd been listening from the kitchen door, asked, "Were they scary?" Dory didn't answer right away. "They weren't trying to be," she finally said. But they didn't have to try. That night, nobody talked much during dinner. Every shadow outside the window stretched longer. Every creak of the house was something more than wood. Tom slept with a rifle next to the bed again, like he had in the jungle all those years ago. And then the forest screamed. It was just after midnight when it started. Not a howl, not a cry. Something else. Higher. Wild. Like laughter twisted with pain. It came in waves, up from the dark line of trees, cascading like a chorus of broken flutes. It made the windows rattle in their frames. Bradley sat up in bed, frozen. Laura clutched the blanket. Dory was already by the door, shotgun in hand. Then came the roar. A single sound, deeper than anything Tom had ever heard, even in war. It vibrated through the floor, through the marrow of his bones. It didn't echo. It ended everything. The night snapped quiet, sudden and brutal, like someone had hit mute on the world. And in that silence, Tom knew. They weren't animals. Not just animals. He didn't tell anyone. But the next day, he went to the tool shed and checked every bullet, every lock, every door. But then, nothing happened. No prints, no sightings, not even the strange laughter. It all just stopped. Until that morning, Bradley had gone out back to check the chicken feed. The boy came running in, mouth open, breath gone. "There's something, Dad. It's come, look." "She's dying." Tom grabbed his coat and ran. What he saw on that grass broke him. A body, still, covered in thick, matted hair. Blood caked along the thigh where a steel trap had torn into flesh and tendon. The skin around it was black, thick with infection. Flies swarmed. The stench was brutal, coppery and sour, gangrene rising like heat off pavement. But it wasn't that stopped Tom cold. It was the face, or what was left of it. One side was melted, as if pressed too close to fire. The mouth twisted, one eye missing, the other still open, dull and red, but aware, watching. He raised the rifle. The thing didn't move. Tom's finger hovered on the trigger. Then the eye blinked, and in that blink, something passed between them, fast as lightning, deep as grief. A message not spoken, not even fully felt, but understood. Please. That's all it was. No growl, no defense. Just surrender, just need. He lowered the rifle. Laura reached his side seconds later. What the hell is that? I don't know, Tom said. But she's dying. Shay? Laura asked. He didn't answer. Dory joined them, eyes wide but calm. Her hand tightened around the old doctor's bag from her late husband. Tom glanced at it. You think it's too far gone? Dory asked. Tom didn't reply. He dropped to his knees beside the creature. The fur was filthy, tangled with leaves and twigs, and worse, the wound was oozing. The smell was unbearable. Still, he pulled out the scissors, the gauze, the penicillin. He said, "Get me hot water and whiskey." For the next 4 hours they worked. Laura kept Bradley away. Dory boiled bandages. Tom dug into the wound, pulled out dead flesh, flushed it with peroxide and grit. The trap had crushed bone. He couldn't fix that, but he could clean it. He could stop the rot. He could try. They dragged an old camping tent out of the shed and set it up beside the barn, over the creature's body, piled hay under her, brought blankets, set a lantern nearby. She never made a sound, not even when he stitched. Bradley snuck up once, peered inside. The eye followed him. He didn't scream. He just said, "She looks sad." Tom stared at the boy. "Yeah, I think she is." By dawn, she was still breathing. Tom sat outside the tent, coat pulled tight, rifle across his lap. Laura joined him with coffee, eyes ringed with worry. "She can't stay here," she said. "She's not going anywhere," he replied. A few feet away, something shifted in the trees. A flicker. A shape, tall and wide, just beyond the line of sight. Tom stood, squinting. He saw him. The big one. The tall one from Dory's story. Watching. Not moving. Tom raised a hand. A slow, open gesture. The figure vanished into the trees. But Tom knew now. This wasn't random. She had been placed there. Delivered, not abandoned. Entrusted. And that changed everything. Because if they'd trusted the carvers once, what else might they bring back through the trees? And what, exactly, had Tom just invited into their lives? He didn't have an answer. He only knew one thing. This wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning. For the next 2 days, the creature barely moved. Her breath rasped low, in shallow drags that sounded more like a rusted hinge than anything living. Her pulse, when Tom could find it, fluttered against his fingers like a bird dying in the dark. The stink of decay, of infection, hung thick around the tent and clung to the skin. Even the animals kept their distance. Chickens roosted early. Daisy stood silently in her pen, and the barn cats watched from a distance with wide, wary eyes. Tom hadn't slept more than an hour at a time. He sat by the flap of the tent, cleaning his tools, boiling water over a camp stove, checking her temperature, dabbing at the sweat on her brow with a rag soaked in salt water. Sometimes Laura would spell him for a few minutes, just long enough to stretch his legs, splash water on his face, and stare out into the pines where he swore he'd seen movement. Once he thought he heard a branch snap. Another time, a low rhythmic knock, wood on wood or bone. He didn't say anything to Dory or Laura. He wasn't sure if it was real or if sleep deprivation was starting to play with him. but it didn't feel like they were alone anymore. Inside the tent, the creature's eye tracked him. Not always. Not when she was unconscious. But in those odd, brief moments when she stirred from fever and pain, the good eye found his, not with terror, not even confusion. Just awareness, a kind of patience. A flicker of something he couldn't name. On the third day, Tom found maggots in the wound again. He bit down a curse and started to clean it, pulling away rotted tissue, flushing with alcohol and antibiotics. She didn't react. No flinch, no sound, no breath that changed. Just silence, until her hand twitched. He froze, heart hammering. He waited. She didn't move again. A few hours later, Bradley snuck into the tent. Tom caught the shadow out of the corner of his eye. "Brad," he warned without turning. "Out, just a second," Bradley whispered. "I brought something." Tom turned. The boy was holding a folded towel with something heavy wrapped inside. He knelt beside the creature and unwrapped it. It was a chunk of raw venison, still red, cold from the freezer. I figured maybe she'd want real food, like meat, like that big one brought her. Tom stared at his son. "You believe she's one of them?" Bradley shrugged. "I think she's not going to make it if we treat her like a dog." Tom sighed. "Put it down." Far side of the tent, Bradley did. As he got up, the creature shifted. Just slightly, enough that her hand dragged a few inches toward the meat. That night, she ate for the first time. Tom sat just outside, listening to the slow, wet sounds of chewing. Not ravenous, not desperate, careful, measured, like she didn't want to be watched. Laura sat beside him in the dark. "You think she knows?" she asked. "Knows what?" "That we're helping her. That we're not like the people who hurt her." Tom watched the stars blink in the ink-black sky. "I think she knows more than we do." They started calling her Luella the next morning. Dory had said it first. "She reminds me of someone I knew when I was a girl. Wild thing, too curious for her own good. Got her foot stuck in a barbed fence once. Cried like a human child." Bradley liked the name. Laura agreed. Tom didn't object. Naming her made something real. Dangerous, maybe. But real. By day 5, Luella was sitting up. Not straight, not fully. But enough to brace herself on one arm, tilt her head and follow movement with her eye. She still hadn't made a sound, not even a grunt. But when Tom came in with her water, she raised her hand and tapped her chest. Slow, deliberate. Tom blinked. "You want me?" She tapped again. So he sat. Slowly, handing her the cup, she took it, drank. And for the first time, her shoulders relaxed. It was the closest thing to a sigh I'd ever seen from a creature like that. 2 nights later, the tent collapsed. A storm rolled in quick. Mountain weather, unpredictable and violent. Wind ripped down through the trees, tore the canvas clean off its frame. Tom and Laura scrambled to pull Luella into the old goat shed beside the barn. Dory hauled in blankets and hay. Bradley brought the lantern. She didn't fight them. She didn't growl or panic. She let them move her, and when she was settled in the straw, she slept for 10 hours straight. The next morning, Tom stepped outside to take a piss and saw something he couldn't explain. At the edge of the woods, just beyond the tree line, stood the big one. The same figure Dory had described. Shoulders like tree trunks, arms that hung too long, covered in black, coarse hair, and staring straight at the shed. Tom didn't move. The big one did. He raised a hand, slow, open-palmed. The same gesture Tom had made days before. Then he was gone, just like that. And something in Tom broke loose. Because up until then he'd believed they were doing this to spite the forest. But now, he understood. They were doing it because of it. Luella hadn't stumbled into their world. She'd been brought, and not just as a burden. Not as a mistake, as a test. That night, Luella stood up on her own. She limped, dragging her right leg like a sack of stone. But she made it from the hay pile to the door of the shed. She looked out into the dark. and she waved, not wildly, not with panic, just a slow, steady raise of the arm, palm forward. The exact same gesture. Tom watched from the house, breath caught in his throat. Bradley stood beside him. "Is she saying thank you?" the boy asked. "I don't know," Tom whispered. Then Luella turned, met their eyes, and nodded once. That's when he knew. She wasn't just surviving. She was staying. It was the 8th night. The air had shifted. Cold coming down off the cabinet peaks like a warning whispered into the bones. Luella was stronger now. She could sit without help, could stand if she leaned against the shed door long enough. The infection had receded, the black rot no longer spreading. Her breathing had evened out, though she still grunted with each movement. The wound on her leg, now a thick scar of puckered flesh and bone gone soft, made her limp in a way that was permanent. But she was alive. That alone changed everything. Tom had built a rhythm around her. Mornings, he brought her food, raw and cooked, to see what she'd take. She preferred raw. Eggs, meat, sometimes bugs she found herself under planks of wood or in corners of the shed. He noticed she never took more than what she needed, never hoarded, never wasted. She was precise, efficient, and when she finished, she always left the bones in a neat pile by the door. Bradley, for his part, remained wary. He wouldn't enter the shed, not since the day Luella bared her teeth when he startled her from sleep. Not a threat. Tom knew the difference. But more like a reminder. Don't come too close, not yet. Still, the boy left gifts near the door. Smooth stones, a worn comic book, a piece of string tied into a loop, and once a stick he'd carved and sanded into a makeshift cane. That cane changed things. Luella picked it up that evening without hesitation. She held it in her massive, black-fingered hands, sniffed the polished surface, then tested it on the floor. The tip clicked against the wood. The tip clicked against the wood. Then she looked up, right at Bradley, who was frozen at the threshold. She didn't smile, but she tapped the cane once, then again, and for the first time, Bradley smiled back. From that day on, she used it to walk. Tom watched this transformation with the cautious awe of someone witnessing a miracle they couldn't explain, and dared not question. But what kept him awake at night wasn't Luella's recovery. It was what came with it. He'd begun seeing the shadows again, in the trees, beyond the fence line. Always distant, always silent. Once, he caught the glint of eyeshine near the tree line. A pair. Tall, unwavering. He stood there for a long minute, breathing slow, not daring to blink. Then, from the corner of his vision, a second pair, lower, smaller, and a third. They were back. He didn't wake Laura that night. Didn't call Dory or grab his rifle. He just stood on the porch in the dark, holding his coffee, heart drumming like a slow, heavy war drum in his chest. They weren't here for him. They were watching her, and the most terrifying thing wasn't that they'd return. It was that he felt no fear. None at all. Later that week, something happened that shattered whatever comfort he'd been building. Tom was in the barn, fixing the latch on the feed room door, when the old radio crackled to life without warning. It wasn't plugged in. It had been dead for years. It screeched once, just noise. And then, for less than 3 seconds, a sound came through that turned his blood cold. A voice. Garbled. Deep. Not human. Not machine. And then it was gone. Tom backed away, breathing hard. He checked the cord. Still unplugged. Static didn't frighten him. Not the jungle, not the war. Not even the night screams from the timber had done what that sound did to him. He didn't tell anyone about it, not even Laura, because part of him thought it wasn't a warning. It was a check-in. They were making sure he was still worthy. The very next day, the big one appeared again. This time, he stepped halfway into the clearing. It was dusk. The shed door was open. Luella sitting on a bale of hay, Bradley sketching on the porch. Tom was splitting wood when he saw him. 7, maybe 8 feet tall, covered in thick black hair that shimmered dark blue in the dying light. Shoulders broad enough to block the tree trunk behind him. Eyes steady, calm. Tom dropped the axe. The big one raised his hand again. Tom raised his in return. But then something unexpected happened. Luella stood up, walked. No limp this time. And with the cane Bradley had made, she stepped out into the yard. She walked halfway to the edge of the trees, paused, and sat. Just sat. She didn't call out, didn't gesture. She waited, and the big one turned and left. That night, Tom sat on the porch with Laura. "I think he wanted to see if we'd kept our word," he said. Laura lit a cigarette. "Do you think Heek's her father?" "I think Heek's her something," Tom said. "And he trusted us with her." Laura didn't respond right away. Then she said, "You ever wonder what they say about us in their world?" Tom looked at her. "Not anymore," he said. "Now I just wonder how long they've been watching," because the truth settled in with a weight that Tom couldn't shake. They hadn't just left Luella behind. They had brought her here. On purpose. And she was learning to walk again, to eat, to watch, to wait. But the most chilling part came later that week. Tom caught Luella staring at the mirror Dory had left in the shed. Not her reflection. But past it, he stepped in, gently, unsure if she'd react. She didn't move. Her eyes were locked on the mirror. "Luella," he whispered. She raised her hand, slowly, and pointed. To herself. Then to him. Then back to herself. And Tom realized something so simple it nearly dropped him to his knees. She didn't think they were all that different. And maybe, just maybe, she was right. But I was foolish. And my mistake was thinking that trust made us safe. It didn't. It made us theirs. By mid-October, the wind had started to speak again. Not the wind that tousled hair, or shook a few dry leaves from their stems. This wind carried weight. It whispered in the cracks of the shed and turned every shadow into a second thought. You could feel it in your back teeth when it howled, a low growl that curled around the eaves and dared you to step into the dark. Luella didn't flinch anymore when it blew. She'd sit on the shed's threshold with the cane Bradley made across her knees, her one good eye tracking the tree line like she was waiting on something. Or someone to return. Tom had grown used to seeing her there. He brought her food twice a day, left tools nearby when he worked the garden, even muttered small talk on lonely afternoons as if she might someday answer. She never did. Not in words, but one morning, he caught her mimicking the way he used the hoe, hands placed awkwardly over the wooden shaft, body swaying gently as she turned the dirt. Her movements were clumsy, and she didn't seem to grasp the purpose. But the imitation was undeniable. That evening, Laura caught her crouched by the chicken coop, watching intently as Dory collected eggs. Luella didn't approach, didn't interfere. She just watched, head tilted, breathing slow. When Dory walked back toward the house, basket full, Luella stood up, reached in, and took a single egg without breaking it. She held it to her chest like it meant something, and in that moment, Dory saw something she would never forget. Not a beast learning to mimic, but a girl trying to remember. Then came the storm. It arrived unannounced on a Tuesday night. The clouds stacked thick and fast over the cabinet range, and the snow came sideways, driven by gusts that screamed through the timber like something ancient and angry. Tom barely had time to bar the windows and brace the shed doors before the white wall swallowed the farm whole. They lost power just before midnight. By lantern light, Tom checked on Luella. She'd moved all her bedding to one corner of the shed, tucked under thick layers of hay. When he stepped inside, she didn't move, but her eye glinted in the dark like a glass bead. "You warm enough?" he asked, stupidly. She stared at him, then lifted her hand and patted the straw beside her. He hesitated, then sat. For a few minutes, neither moved. Outside, the wind banged like fists on wood. But in that tight space, there was a strange calm. Then she did something he couldn't have expected. She touched his wrist, lightly, carefully, and then placed her own broad hand flat against his chest. He could feel her heat through his shirt, and in that touch, a picture formed. Not seen, not imagined, but felt. The way a sudden memory hijacks your breath. It was the creek. The bend where Dory had seen them. The tall one standing beside Luella. And then, blood, a scream, a trap snapping, darkness, pain, cold. Then light, him. Tom jerked back, gasping. She didn't react, just lowered her hand and looked down. And he realized she hadn't forgotten what happened. She'd just been waiting for someone to ask. But that wasn't the most important part. The picture hadn't ended with her pain. It had ended with him. She had chosen to show him. And that choice carried a trust deeper than any word ever could. Snow fell heavy the next morning. The farm was buried to the waist. Tom had to dig a path just to reach the shed. But something else waited for him that day. At the edge of the trees, just beyond the first line of pines, something lay sprawled in the snow. It was a deer. Broken neck. Legs snapped at the knees. Clean kill. He knew what it meant. A gift. Laura stood beside him, arms wrapped tight, watching the tree line. "They're back," she said. Tom nodded. "Do we take it?" she asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he approached the carcass, knelt beside it. No blood trail, no prints in the snow, just the body, left like an offering. He reached out, touched its flank. Still warm. "Yeah," he said finally. "We take it." That night, Luella ate the heart raw, alone in the shed. Bradley watched from the porch, his hands gripping the rail. "I don't think she's going anywhere," he said. Tom stood beside him. "She can't. Not with that leg. I don't mean because she can't walk." Tom looked at his son. Bradley didn't blink. "She belongs here." In the weeks that followed, Luella became part of the rhythm. She helped Laura sort vegetables in the root cellar, learned to lift baskets and carry them with surprising delicacy. She even followed Dory into the woods once, slowly, leaning on her cane, until they reached the creek. There, she stopped, sat on a flat rock, and stared upstream for nearly an hour. The big one didn't return that winter, nor did the others. Only the deer came, always in late November, always with a broken neck and empty eyes, left like a message carved in snow. Tom buried the bones behind the shed, and each time he did, he thought about that moment in the storm, that hand on his chest, that image in his mind. She remembered all of it, and she had let him see, not as punishment, but as proof. He thought he'd saved her that day in the yard, but he was wrong. She had let him. Spring thaw came late that year. The drifts held longer than usual, hard-packed snow clinging to the shadowed side of trees, even after the sun started staying up past dinner. But inside the farmhouse, the warmth had already begun to slip away. Not from the fire that still burned every night, but from Dory. It began as a cough, dry, shallow, just enough to make Laura worry. By the second week of March, Dory had stopped riding. Speckles stood idle in the paddock, her mane matted, watching the house with the same unease everyone inside seemed to carry. Laura brought her mother tea laced with whiskey, and Tom, without saying it, moved a cot into the downstairs parlor. Dory never asked why. Luella changed during that time. Not outwardly. Her limp remained, her hair wild, her vocabulary still silent. But she stayed closer, sat longer by the porch, watched the windows longer, even picked up the eggs without being asked. And every afternoon, just before dusk, she'd circle the house once, pause outside the parlor, and then go back to her shed, until the night Dory stopped breathing. It was quiet, peaceful. Laura had been sitting beside her, hand wrapped around her mother's, humming the old hymn they used to sing in church, softly and tenderly. Dory's breath had slowed, and then simply didn't come back. Laura didn't cry right away. Neither did Tom. The house was so still you could hear the fire settling into embers, but Luella knew. She came to the back door that night, not pounding, not howling. She just stood there, hunched and unmoving, staring through the screen as if she could feel the shift. Tom opened it slowly. Luella stepped in for the first time ever, and she walked straight to the parlor. She didn't kneel, didn't touch Dory's hand or face. She just stood there for a long, long moment, her breath shallow, her eyes distant. Then she sat down on the floor, legs folded beneath her like a child, and stayed the whole night. Laura watched from the hall. "She's grieving," she whispered. "She understands." Tom didn't answer, because part of him still didn't believe. Not that Luella had emotions, but that something not human could mourn a human so quietly, so completely, without needing anyone to see it. But he had seen it, and it haunted him. They buried Dory 2 days later under the oldest pine on the property. Bradley carved a marker from a fallen branch. Luella watched from a distance, hands clasped, body still. After the service, she approached the grave, crouched low, and pressed a flat river stone into the dirt. Then walked away. It was the same week Laura's lump came back. She had beaten it once before, years earlier, before they moved to Montana. Surgery, chemo, the works. But this time it returned with a vengeance. By May, she couldn't lift the laundry basket. By June, she couldn't keep down food. And by July, she stopped pretending. Tom knew what was coming. Laura did too. She made arrangements quietly, talked to a notary, reviewed Dory's will, and made sure the land would stay with Tom and Bradley. Paul and Karen came sniffing around, asking questions, but were quickly reminded this wasn't Brooklyn. This land had roots now. And ghosts. Laura's decline was rapid. Luella seemed to feel it before anyone said it aloud. She lingered by the porch again, sat by the window. And one morning, after Laura had thrown up 3 times before breakfast, Luella placed a bundle of herbs on the kitchen table. Tom didn't know what they were, didn't care, but Laura smiled. "She's trying," she whispered. One night, when the pain had gotten too much, and Laura couldn't speak, Luella entered the house again. She didn't knock, didn't make a sound. She walked into the bedroom, knelt beside the bed, and placed her hand on Laura's forehead. Tom stepped forward, but Laura grabbed his wrist and shook her head. Luella stayed like that until sunrise. Laura died 3 nights later. That morning, Bradley didn't say a word. He just walked out to the shed. Tom followed half an hour later. He found Luella sitting in the straw, her back to the door, staring into the dark. Bradley stood beside her, silent. Then, slowly, Luella lifted her arm and placed her hand on the boy's shoulder. And for the first time since his mother passed, Bradley cried. Tom sat beside them both. "I thought we were helping her," he whispered, "but maybe she was the one helping us." A week later, Paul and Karen returned. They arrived with papers, questions, veiled threats. Luella stayed out of sight. But the air changed, tense, electric. Tom refused to sign anything. Bradley sat on the porch with a baseball bat. Karen asked what was in the shed. Tom told her the truth. "Something you'll never understand." They didn't come back. The rest of that summer passed in a strange stillness. The fields grew. The chickens laid. The wind calmed. But something in the house felt thin, like the world had tilted a few degrees and everyone was just learning how to walk on it again. Luella kept helping. She picked vegetables, gathered eggs, even learned, somehow, to use the outdoor privy without making a mess. Tom didn't teach her. Neither did Bradley. She figured it out. And in that silence, in those small acts of grace, something settled between them all. It wasn't peace. Not exactly. But it was the closest thing to family they'd had left. Until one day, in the middle of October, Tom stepped out into the yard and smelled something he hadn't smelled in years. Rot. Thick. Sweet. Wrong. He followed the scent to the shed and found Luella lying in the straw, eyes half-lidded, breath shallow. He rushed to her side. "Not now," he whispered. "Not you too," but she didn't move. Didn't speak, just reached out, slow, trembling, and placed her hand in his. And in that final, fragile touch, he saw it all again. The creek, the scream, the snow, the heart, the egg, and the face of his wife, smiling through the pain. Then she was gone. And Tom knew, without needing to say it, he hadn't saved Luella. She'd saved them. The last time Tom saw her alive, the sky was pale with the onset of autumn, and the air carried that strange weight he'd come to recognize. A kind of hush that didn't belong to weather. It was 6 years ago now, though some mornings it felt closer than breath. He'd gone to the shed, same as always, expecting to find her sitting in the doorway, cane across her lap, watching the woods like she always did when the leaves began to turn. But there was no sound inside, no slow shift of straw, no soft grunt, no greeting in that way. She never spoke but always made herself known. Then came the smell. He knew it instantly. Sour, sweet, sick. He'd smelled it in Vietnam, in field hospitals and jungle clearings, and in the hushed back rooms of Montana farmhouses, where folks didn't always win their fight. It was death, and it was hers. She lay crumpled against the wall, curled in on herself like something trying to get smaller, to disappear. One arm was stretched toward the door. Her face, gentle, heavy, was turned away. But Tom knew. His knees hit the floor before his mind caught up, his hands trembling as he reached for her. She was cold, but not rigid, not yet. He sat with her until nightfall, didn't light the lantern, didn't speak. When Bradley came looking, he found them there, his father and what had once been Luella, sitting in silence in the dark like the end of something sacred. The next morning, Tom built a box, not a coffin, just a box, made of pine slats and thick nails, the kind you build when you don't know how to say goodbye with words. Bradley helped carry her out. They didn't bury her on the property. That had never felt right. Instead, they carried her 3 miles into the timber, past the bend in the creek, past the hollow where the deer bones had piled, to the clearing she always stopped in. There, under a grove of cottonwoods, they placed her down. Tom said no prayer. He just stood there, hat in hand, and said the only thing that came to him. "Thank you." That would have been the end of it. But it wasn't. Because 2 nights later, Tom stepped outside and found something waiting for him at the back door. A deer. Its neck snapped, its legs bent backward, left in the same place as always. He didn't touch it for a full hour, just sat on the porch and stared. She was gone. He had buried her. But the gift had come. He waited every night after that, not for her, but for them. For the tall one. The family, the ones who had left her behind. He never saw them, but the deer kept coming, once every spring, until 2 years ago. That spring, the yard was empty. No deer, no movement in the trees, just silence. Tom sat on the porch that whole night, and when the dawn came gray and wide across the ridge, he knew what it meant. They were gone too. Dead, moved? It didn't matter. Whatever bond had tethered them together, Luella, her family, this place, it had broken. Or maybe it had been released. He never told Bradley. Didn't want to add another loss to the boy's heart. But he felt it in his own bones, like frost creeping up through old lumber. That chapter was done. The trail had ended. But there was one more thing. That fall, Tom walked into the woods alone. Carried a small jar, sealed tight. Inside, clumps of coarse black hair, tangled with bits of straw. Luella's. He left it by the bend in the creek, on the same rock she used to sit on, and waited until dusk. That was all. He walked home in the dark, and that night, for the first time in decades, the forest didn't whisper, didn't creak, didn't breathe. It watched, and then it let him go. The silence didn't start with Luella's death. It started with her absence. There's a difference. One is an ending. The other is a presence that never left, but no longer speaks. For 2 full years after she was gone, Tom waited. He didn't say that's what he was doing, not even to Bradley. But every spring, on the last day of May, he cleaned the back porch, made coffee before dawn, and sat beside the same chipped bowl she used to sniff at. He always filled it with a few hard-boiled eggs and whatever scraps he'd have shared with her if she were still around. Bacon rind, leftover biscuit, sometimes just a folded napkin and a cherry tomato. "Bo dear." The bowl stayed full. No deer. No calls in the trees. No distant knock. For the first time in decades, the farm was just a farm. Tom didn't realize how much he'd grown used to their rhythm until it was gone. The quiet was louder now. Every creak of wood sounded final. Every breeze seemed like it was searching for something it couldn't find. Even the animals seemed to notice. Daisy, the old cow, had stopped going near the edge of the woods altogether. The barn cats stayed closer to the house. Tom walked the perimeter more often, not because he feared anything, but because he hoped. That was the strange part. It wasn't fear he missed. It was presence. He'd spent years thinking Luella was the outsider, the exception, the thing that didn't belong in their world. But after 2 springs without her, Tom began to understand the truth. We had been the outsiders, and they had let us in, not for our sake, but for hers. He found himself talking to her sometimes, not in grief, in ritual, while mending the fence, while hauling hay, while standing in the garden with the rain soaking his shoulders. "You'd hate this weather," he'd mutter. "Too wet, too loud." Or, "Bradley's dating a girl from Kalispell. She doesn't know about you. Don't think she'd believe it anyway." He never expected an answer, but he spoke as if she were still listening. Then came that night. A storm had broken earlier in the evening. Rain so hard it slapped the tin roof like it meant to break through. Thunder cracked like God's knuckles dragging across the sky. Tom had just settled by the fireplace when the radio on the kitchen shelf sparked to life. Same one from all those years back. Still unplugged. No words this time. Just a hum. Low, resonant. It lasted 3 seconds, then silence, but not the empty kind, the listening kind. Tom stood there for a full minute, breath caught in his chest. Then he turned the radio toward the wall and sat back down. He didn't speak of it again, because he knew what it meant. They were still out there, somewhere, but they were watching from further now, not waiting to be invited, just making sure he remembered. And he did. The next morning, he took the old bowl and walked it out into the woods, further than usual, past the creek, past the second bend, up to the old stump Luella once used to scratch her back on. He placed the bowl there and walked away. Not because he expected anyone to take it, but because the act itself was the only language they had left. That evening, just as dusk tipped the trees in rust-colored light, he swore he heard it, a knock. Far off, wood on wood. 3 short taps, and nothing more. He didn't tell Bradley, didn't write it down, but that night he didn't sleep. He just lay in bed, eyes open to the ceiling, letting the quiet fill him in a way it never had before. Because for the first time since she left, it didn't feel like absence anymore. It felt like permission. But I would be lying if I said that comfort stayed. Because even now, every time the wind shifts strange or the trees hold their breath a second too long, I wonder, did we earn their trust, or did we just borrow it? And if it was borrowed, what happens when they come to collect? Because some silences don't last. Some just wait. And wait. The last deer never came, and maybe that was the real goodbye. Not Luella's breath, not the jar of hair left by the creek, not even the silence that followed, but that spring morning, 2 years ago, when Tom stepped onto the porch and found only grass, dew, and the smell of warming earth where a broken-necked buck had always been. Something inside him cracked. Not loudly, not with grief, but with finality. The kind that doesn't echo, just settles. He waited until noon that day, refilled the bowl with eggs, sat with coffee cooling beside him, eyes scanning the edge of the tree line as shadows grew long. But nothing moved. No figure, no knock, no blur between trunks. Just the wind, shifting warm. By evening, he put the bowl back inside. Bradley came by the next day. Taller now, older. A man shaped by something few others would ever understand. He walked the farm with practiced familiarity, but his eyes were different. Clearer, yes, but edged. Tom didn't say much. He didn't need to. They shared a fire that night, and after the third beer, Bradley asked the question he'd been holding back. "Do you think they're really gone?" Tom didn't answer right away. Then, not gone, just done. Bradley looked at the woods. "You think they'll ever come back?" Tom shook his head slowly. "Wouldn't make sense. We did what they asked. We cared for her. We kept the story. But we never told anyone." Tom smiled without warmth. "That was the story." Bradley leaned forward. "So what now? We just forget. Pretend it never happened." Tom's voice was low. "We remember." "That's the gift." Bradley didn't respond, but Tom saw his jaw tighten. He wanted more. All these years, all this silence, and still, he wanted a reason. "I thought about writing it all down," Tom said. "Sending it somewhere. A newspaper, one of those cryptid podcasts. Hell, even the Smithsonian. But every time I sat to type, something stopped me." Bradley raised an eyebrow. "Guilt?" Tom looked out the window. "Gratitude." Then, as if stirred by the mention of something sacred, a wind slipped through the trees. Soft. Cold. Tom stood, crossed the room, then pulled a narrow wooden box from the shelf. He opened it without ceremony. Inside, 3 items. The cane Bradley had carved. A strand of Luella's hair, tied in red thread, and a drawing, childlike, faded, of a tall, hunched figure and a boy, side by side, beneath a tree. Bradley stared at it. "I don't remember drawing that." "You didn't," Tom said. Bradley looked up, and for a moment, the silence in the room thickened into something else. Something that watched. Tom closed the box. "I used to think the gift was saving her," he said. "Then I thought maybe it was her saving us." Bradley nodded. "And now?" Tom stared at the dying fire. "I think the gift was being chosen." Later that night, after Bradley left, Tom walked back out to the porch. The bowl was still empty, but something had changed. He couldn't explain it. Not in a way that would make sense to anyone else. But there, etched in the dust on the railing, was a shape, a handprint, too wide, fingers like tree roots, pressed deep into the grain as if left behind with intent. He didn't call Bradley, didn't scrub it away, just sat down beside it, breath slow, heart loud, because it wasn't a message. It was a memory, and it had weight. Now, when people ask Tom about the woods, about what's real and what's just a story, he smiles. Sometimes he says nothing. Sometimes he shrugs. But when the sky turns gray in May, and the wind carries that certain chill, he sets out the bolo again, not for them, for himself, to remember. Because not all monsters hide. Some sit with you on porches, some bring gifts, and some just need to be loved once in their life, even if only for a little while. Some stories linger, not because of what they proved, but because of what they never tried to. They do not roar their truths or demand belief. They whisper. And if you're still enough, quiet enough, they find you. In a world so desperate to explain everything, to categorize, to dissect and disbelieve, there's something radical about allowing wonder to exist without condition. Not every mystery needs solving. Not every answer makes us better. Sometimes, the unknown is the most honest part of living, because it reminds us how little we control, how much we still don't see, and how vital it is to look anyway. Maybe that's what this story really offers. Not proof, but presence. A reminder that compassion isn't limited to those who look like us, talk like us, walk the way we do. That being human is less about biology and more about